Thank you so much for being here. We hope that you're staying healthy and safe. This webinar is co-hosted by California Food Policy Advocates and the Food Research and Action Center, also known as FRAC. My name is Angeles Nelson, and I am a policy associate with California Food Policy Advocates. I will be facilitating this webinar. Thank you so much for being here. Can we go to the next slide, please? Just a quick word about California Food Policy Advocates. For almost 30 years, we have worked to improve the health and well-being of low-income Californians by increasing their access to nutritious and affordable foods. Our mission is increasingly urgent as the COVID-19 crisis continues to harm millions of families across California. With the rising rates of unemployment and food insecurity, more students need access to nutritious school meals. The community eligibility provision is a powerful tool that schools can use to meet the pressing needs of their students. The economic effects of COVID-19 mean more schools are eligible to apply for CEP, and many schools can receive increased reimbursement through CEP. This webinar is designed to help you with both. Next slide, please. Today, we will hear an overview of CEP from the California Department of Education. We will get a virtual tour of meal counts, which is a CEP grouping tool. And we also will see a demonstration of a CEP financial calculator. And we will end our webinar with a Q&A session. Next slide, please. We are truly grateful for the fantastic panel of experts that have joined us today. With us today, we have Gurjit Baraya. He is the Staff Service Manager of the School Nutrition Program Administration, or SNPA, in the Nutrition Services Division, NSD. The SNPA team is responsible for the administrative oversight of the National School Lunch and the School Breakfast programs in California. Gurjit has been with the Nutrition Service Division for over 5 years. He started as an analyst in the Program Accountability Administration section before serving as the manager of the Summer Meal Program. We also have with us Paloma Perez Bertrand. She is a former Child Nutrition Director, and she's currently working as a consultant at the San Diego Hunger Coalition, focusing on providing technical assistance to school districts in San Diego County. Also, Nicola Baer will be talking. He is an organizing member of Open San Diego, as well as the lead developer on Meals Count. When not working on Civic Takes, he runs the development at Silker, a digital agency in Carlsbad, as Director of Technology. And we will also be hearing from Etienne Melcher-Philbin, who is a senior child nutrition policy analyst for FRAC. Etienne works with a diverse group of national and state partners to expand the use of meal programs amongst low-income children through the implementation of effective strategies such as the community eligibility and breakfast after the bell. Thank you so much for being here with us and for taking the time. We are going to start the presentation today with Gurjit. Next slide, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Angeles, for that very nice introduction and for kicking things off today. Over the next 20 minutes, I'm going to just kind of start us off with a nuts and bolts of community eligibility provision, including a brief overview of what the provision is, some eligibility requirements, how percentages are determined for districts that choose to implement this option. We'll talk about some direct certification best practices that can really be applied whether or not you ultimately make the decision to apply for CEP, and then as well as the validation process for agencies that do decide to move forward with the provision for this upcoming school year. Next slide, please. So what is CEP? So CEP was actually originally established with the passage of the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act back in 2010. and it became available to local school districts beginning in school year 2014-15. CEP really builds upon some of the other alternative provision options that the USDA had previously offered, such as provisions 1, 2, and 3. But unlike the other provision options under CEP, schools do not collect any meal applications from their students. Claiming reimbursements are based completely upon the number of children who are eligible for free meals through the process of direct certification. Unlike some of the other provisions, which give schools the option to provide either lunch or breakfast, CEP ensures that all children at the school site receive both a free breakfast and a free lunch. Next slide, please. So when we talk about eligibility for CEP, there are really three basic eligibility requirements. First and foremost, schools must have an identified student percentage of at least 40%. The 40% ISP threshold has to be met without any type of rounding. So if you have an ISP of 39.9%, that school on its own would not be eligible. As I kind of go through the following slides, we'll take a little bit closer look at how we determine that ISP. Second, as I mentioned just a moment ago, schools must agree to serve both breakfast and lunch at no cost. So if you are looking to apply for CEP, you must first be approved to operate both breakfast and lunch through the National School Lunch and School Breakfast programs. And then lastly, and we kind of, as a CDE, we say this often, your school must have a history of implementing the school nutrition programs in compliance with regulations. So this doesn't mean that if you had a finding in your most recent review that you're not eligible, but what it does mean is that you must have completed and implemented any corrective actions that we required as part of a previous review before being approved to operate CEP. Next slide, please. So if you love fractions, you're really going to like this slide because the ISP calculation is really just one simple mathematical equation. The denominator, the number that's on the bottom of that fraction, is the total, bottom of the ISP is the total number of students that are enrolled at the school sites that you wish to elect CEP at. So typically, the school district is going to get this information from their student information system. The numerator that's on top of that fraction is the number of students that are eligible for free meals through direct certification. So this means both direct certification at the state level through our CalPAD system and any local level direct certification that you complete with local county offices and liaisons. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of those direct certification best practices and how to get the most out of the ISP a little bit later here in this presentation. Next slide, please. Determining your ISP. So typically during normal times, I know these are far from normal, the ISP is calculated using data as of April 1st of the prior school year. So that means that districts would pull their student enrollment counts and direct certification numbers as of that date to determine what their ISP is going to be. But this year, because of COVID, USDA has issued some nationwide waivers that include CEP. So one of those waivers, it gives districts the flexibility to use data from any point in time between April 1st and June 30th to calculate that ISP. So, I mean, we know that the economic repercussions of COVID for many families across the state and the country was significant. And we have heard from many of our partners that enrollments in other programs, such as CalFresh, have increased since the start of COVID. So, in some ways, this really does make it the perfect time for districts to kind of revisit those CEP numbers and make sure that your ISP is as high as possible. Another thing that I really want to note that's important is that when you're utilizing data for your ISP, you must be pulling figures from the same time period. So for example, if you're using direct certification numbers that you pulled on June 30th, you would want to be comparing them to enrollment numbers as of that date. You wouldn't want to compare, say, your direct certification numbers from June 30th to your enrollment on May 15th. It really should be it should be an apples to apples comparison. Next slide, please. So getting the most out of that ISP. So some direct certification best practices. We know that, at a minimum, the regulations require that districts pull direct certification data at least 3 times a year. But we know unequivocally that the districts that really have the most success with direct certification are pulling their numbers on a monthly basis. By running that CalPADS report monthly, you're maximizing the number of children who are identified as free eligible through CalFresh, CalWorks, Medi-Cal Free, and Foster. And I also want to note, just this is kind of gets lost in some of the details, but when you're looking at direct certification through Medi-Cal, you have to do that through CalPADS only. That cannot be done through other methods. And the reason is because Medi-Cal eligibility for free and reduced price meals is based on very specific aid codes that correlate to the income of families who are receiving Medi-Cal. So in other words, not every family that receives Medi-Cal benefits is necessarily eligible for free or reduced price meals as a result. So and a long way of saying CalPADS is really the only acceptable source for Medi-Cal direct certification that has to be done at the state level. Next slide, please. The second key to really getting the most out of your direct certification matches is to ensure that you're connecting with resources in your local area so that you're getting the most out of those matches from your local county officials. So on this slide, I know there's quite a bit of information here, but the main takeaway is that there are these 3 hyperlinks will direct you to CDE web pages that have contact lists for local county liaisons. If you haven't already, I highly encourage you to reach out to these contacts, develop relationships with them, and ensure that you're also getting lists from these contacts for students that attend your school sites. Over the years at the state level, we've put a lot of effort into making improvements to CalPADS to ensure that we're capturing as many students as possible. But we know that there's almost always additional children that can appear on local county lists that can also be used to calculate your ISP. And then one area that folks often overlook when calculating their ISP is that they forget about those sibling extensions. So remember that if you have any siblings of children who are directly certified for free meals, those sibling extensions can also be used to calculate your ISP. So for those students who are eligible through CalFresh, CalWorks, the Food Distribution Program on Indian Reservations, FDPIR, and Medi-Cal, any of the siblings who reside in the same household are also eligible to be included in the ISP. And then I think I touched on this earlier, even if your district does not choose to implement CEP, these direct certification best practices really can and should be utilized by all districts. I mean, utilizing some of these could really mean the difference between a child receiving a free meal and not. So just trying to kind of hammer that point home. So next, let's transition to how reimbursements are calculated. So I know Nikolai is going to talk a little bit more specifically about a great tool that his team has put together for grading sites. But this is really an area that schools have gotten better at with maximizing ISP. And essentially, you can utilize different groupings of schools to get the most out of your ISP. So this might mean that you would combine a school site that has a high ISP with a school site that maybe has a lower ISP to try to average out those 2 school sites to get the most amount of reimbursement. When you're considering CEP, you really have kind of 3 options. First, you can go district-wide and say, I'm going to put all of my school sites on CEP. It works for us. You may choose to do CEP at individual sites, or you can group them like we're just kind of touching on here. When you're grouping sites together, each of those groups will establish its own ISP and its own claiming percentage. So that's kind of where the strategic approach comes in to make sure that you're maximizing the amount of reimbursement that you get. One of the common questions that we have is, well, how many sites can be in a group? There is no maximum. So you can have a group that has, a single site that we would consider an individual CEP site, or a group of sites that could have 100, 200 plus, depending on the size of your district. There's no maximum to the number of sites that can be included in any one group. Next slide, please. So if you didn't like the fraction earlier, we're going to try multiplication this time around. To calculate your claiming percentage, you're simply just taking your district's ISP and multiplying it by the USDA multiplier. The multiplier is currently set at 1.6. That's a number that the USDA determines. And the result of that multiplication is the percentage of meals that you'll be reimbursed at the free rate. The remaining meals would then be reimbursed at the paid rate. So on this slide, we gave an example of a school district that has an ISP of 55%. We would simply take that 55%, multiply it by 1.6. So this district would have 88% of their meals claimed at the free rate and 12% of their meals claimed at the paid rate. That target ISP that each district shoots for really is going to vary based on a number of variables related to how much it costs to do business, for lack of a better term, for your district. But the magic number for 100% free and reimbursement is 62.5%. So if you can reach that threshold of 62.5 for your ISP, all of the meals that you serve for breakfast and lunch will be reimbursed at the free rate. Next slide, please. A couple additional benefits of CEP. So one thing is that your ISP will never decrease during the course of your 4-year cycle. In future years, you do have the option. So if, say, you're able to identify that you now have a higher ISP than you had before, you can reapply and take advantage of that higher ISP. And in those situations, the clock in that 4-year period of your CEP cycle would restart again. Another important note that I do want to add is if you're on, if you're one of those districts where not 100% of your meals are reimbursed at the free rate, if you find that at the end of the year that your reimbursements aren't sufficient to cover all of the costs of the nutrition program, that the difference has to be covered by non-federal funds. So for most school districts, that would mean that it would be the school district's general fund. But that's one of the many reasons why it's important that you're engaging district leadership outside of nutrition when you're considering CEP. An example of that might be, let's say, at the end of your year, your total overall program expenses were $1 million, and your total program reimbursement was $980,000. That $200,000 difference would be that $20,000 difference would be required to be covered by non-federal funding sources. Next slide, please. So in addition to all these numbers and cents that we're talking about, there are a number of benefits to CEP. First and foremost, there's a significant decrease in the amount of administrative burden that food services has to deal with when operating CEP. Right at the get-go, I started off with you do not collect any meal applications. So think about those, the first month of your school year when you're going through a really hectic period and trying to get your all your sites up and running again. You do not have to worry about collecting meal applications and processing those for all children. You've already established your claiming rate, and you're simply concerned. Your only concern is making sure that the children are being fed. If you're one of those districts that is able to operate CEP district-wide, you're also exempt from having to conduct verification. Again, there are no meal applications that you would have to go through and verify. So there really can be a significant reduction in some of the administrative burden that's related to our programs. There's a significant decrease in the amount of effort that has to go into meal counting and claiming. So you're no longer having to track the individual eligibility of children. You're just simply taking account of each reimbursable meal that is served. And just beyond that service line, there really is an increased sense of equity among students at CEP sites because by serving everybody, you're removing the stigma that is attached to receiving a free meal. It eliminates meal debt, which we know can have a significant negative impact on school district general funds. So, that's another area to kind of consider as you're looking at CEP if it's viable for your district as well. If last year you had $100,000 of meal debt, that's could be potentially wiped out if you choose to go to a universal feeding option. And then there is always the potential increase in participation. So anecdotally, we've heard from districts that those who are electing CEP see their participation in their meal programs increase, that then as a result increases their program revenue as well. Next slide, please. So how do you apply? So along with that flexibility that USDA provided for the use of data, they also extended that CEP application deadline to August 31st, 2020. So I know our analysts here in Sacramento have already began to receive applications from districts who are looking to renew or who are looking to start a new CEP cycle. We've had a number of districts that have revisited their ISPs and see that they have a higher percentage and they want to get the most out of it. So those applications are slowly trickling in. I do want to point out that while the deadline is the end of August, we know that in California especially, a lot of schools are still planning to start before the end of the month of August. So to ensure that our teams have enough time to process, to review, and to approve your application, please make sure that you're submitting those prior to the start of your school year. The hyperlink that I've included on this slide is a direct link to our CDE management bulletin that talks in great detail about the application process, and that it'll have all the forms that are required and the documentation that you'll be required to submit. And then, of course, I always encourage folks to reach out to your S&P program specialists. As you're working through the application, our team members can help you out with, answering clarifying questions and making sure that when you do submit that application that everything is complete and that we're not having to send it back for additional info or feedback. Next slide, please. So when you submit your CEP application, there'll be 3 forms that you're going to submit to us. The first is a CEP application checklist. So this just makes sure that you have all the required documentation together. The second is the SMP 19, and this is an update to your meal counting and collection procedures to reflect that you're not going to be taking meal counts based on eligibility type. The SMP 19 also includes basic ISP calculator using aggregate numbers of your directly certified students and the number of students enrolled, so you have a good sense of what your ISP might look like. The third piece you'll submit to us is the SNP 55. So this is a more detailed breakdown of the students that you've identified who are used to calculate that ISP. And then lastly, you'll also submit to us all of your source documentation that you use to determine that ISP. So those source documents might include your CalPADS extracts, any local county lists that you receive from county liaisons, etc. Next slide, please. The reason that we're asking for all of those source documents right at the time that you apply is because we made a significant shift in our internal procedures beginning last year to validate the ISP at the time of application. So this review is completed via a desk audit by our compliance coordination unit. And by doing that validation at the time of application, we ensure that there's not going to be any fiscal action for any errors that we might identify as part of our review. If there's any discrepancies, we can adjust the ISP and move forward accordingly. Our goal is always to try to complete all of those validations before districts submit their first claims for reimbursement, so we're not having to go back and ask for or take fiscal action. And then, of course, because we're doing the review up front, we're doing it at the time of application. That means it's one less thing that you would have to worry about when you have your administrative review, because that component of the review has already been completed. Next slide, please. So before we move on, I've got a couple additional resources for you, and we will share the slide deck as well. But you're looking to jot down some web pages. The first is going to be a hyperlink to our CEP web page that just goes into much more detail about this overview that I just provided. The second link is a link to our school nutrition course catalog. So again, this will be made available via a recording, but this specific video talks about a lot of the nuts and bolts that I've covered, especially if you want to hear it through someone else's voice. And then lastly, again, I really encourage folks to reach out to your program specialist. So if you have access to CNIPS, the form caseload ID, you can go and find your respective county and reach out to your county analyst if you have any specific questions related to your CEP application. So that wraps it up for my portion. Now I think I'll turn it back to Angeles.
Thank you so much, Gurjit, for all that information and overview of CEP. We know that CEP is complex, and we really appreciate everyone's efforts to tackle this topic. Please feel free to write any questions for Gurjit in the question and answer box, and we'll have a chance to hear the answers during the Q&A session. Let's do one more polling question. Nami, could you please show the question? And the question is, when was the last time your team downloaded direct certification data from CalPADS? Just take a minute to answer the question. And now we're gonna move on to meals count. Next slide, please. If you see the question, just go ahead and answer it in the box. Thank you. Okay, so Meal Counts is developed and supported by a great partnership between Open San Diego, California Food Policy Advocates, and the San Diego Hunger Coalition. This team brings together years of expertise in tech, policy advocacy, and school nutrition programs. We are always looking for ways to improve meal counts and to better support your work. We are really looking forward to sharing the results of our partnership and hearing your questions. Next slide, please. We're gonna go to Paloma Perez Beltran for a, go ahead, Paloma.
Thank you, Angeles. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today. My name is Paloma, and I'm a former school nutrition professional, and I'm very happy and proud to represent the San Diego Hunger Coalition and collaborate with the team at CFPA and Open San Diego to develop Meals Count. I also want to thank the nutrition directors in San Diego County and all over California who took time out of their busy schedules to meet with us and try out the beta version of Meals Count, and for giving us very helpful feedback. We use their feedback and recommendations in improving and finalizing the final version of the website that you're going to see today. Next slide, please. As was mentioned earlier, community eligibility not only reduces paperwork, but also makes possible huge gains in meeting children's nutritional needs by providing a healthy breakfast and lunch every day at school. But we also understand that nutrition directors need to ensure and maintain a fiscally sound school nutrition program. We know there are several perceived barriers to CEP, and we recognize that grouping schools to facilitate implementation can be a challenging and time-consuming process that can very quickly become cumbersome if attempted to do manually. Next slide. So as a solution to that challenge, we developed Meals Count, an optimization tool that helps nutrition directors group schools in the best way to maximize federal reimbursement. And the best part is that Meals Count is free for everyone. It's a web-based free tool. Next, please. If you're interested in exploring CEP with meals count, having on hand the most updated data for each school within your school district will allow you to make the most out of the website. The data needed includes enrollment, number of total unduplicated identified students, and average daily participation data for breakfast and lunch, whether it's actual or anticipated numbers. Next, please. And I mentioned average daily participation for breakfast and lunch as a data point because shortly after we started working on the development of meals count, the need to include ADP was very clear. By taking into account participation rates, meals count is able to create clusters of schools while maximizing the federal reimbursement. So with that, our hope is that the information can be used to help nutrition directors compare the revenue under their current claiming process versus the expected reimbursement under CEP. And that's the reason why we believe that meals count is a great starting tool to estimate the financial impact of implementing CEP in one school or a group of schools. So that was an introduction to meals count. Now I'll turn it over to Nicola. He's a software developer with Open San Diego, and he's going to show you how to navigate meals count, and he'll give you a tour of the website. And I want to add that Nikolai has volunteered his time, talent, and expertise to the development of this project, and we're incredibly thankful for his valuable and essential contributions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Paloma. Hi, everyone. My name is Nikolai. As everyone said, I'm with Open San Diego, volunteer there. I've been working on meals count for about almost 2 years now, so it's been kind of an interesting journey for me. But I'm really excited to share it with everyone and be able to get this tool out to schools and districts so they can use it. So what I'm going to go through now is I'm going to go through and just kind of give a quick overview of how meals count works. I'm trying to give an idea of the problem it tries to solve, and then I'm going to do a quick virtual tour of how to get the meals count, how to use it, and how to get your school district information in there, and kind of give a few little tips along the way, because it's not the easiest thing as all this stuff is to use, so it's good to understand how to use it best. And then I'm going to, if there's time available, I'm going to go ahead and also do a quick live tour or screen share just to kind of show it in practice on the live site, sort of in real life, so to say. All right, so the first thing is really how meals count works. So the inputs for meals count is going to be the data from your school districts per school. So it's going to be, you can think about a spreadsheet. It's essentially going to be one row per each school, and we're going to be looking at the total enrolled, the number of eligible students, directly certified students, and then the average daily participation. And then we're going to take that information into it, and then we use algorithms inside the schools to run all different possible scenarios that we can do. And this goes very quickly becomes very difficult to come through all of these scenarios. So we do kind of a best effort to find a maximized grouping and reimbursement based upon the schools that you enter in. And we do have some adjusting factors too, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in the future, because it can be difficult, and sometimes the output of what comes out is not always ideal for the school district. All right, so just kind of talking about why grouping matters. So I know Gurjeet and Paloma talked about this a little bit before, but here's kind of a simplistic example where, say you have 4 schools in your district and 2 are at 40% and 2 are at 85%. If you were to group the 2 at 85% together and 2 at 40% together, you get full CP coverage on one, and you get a lot less coverage. You get a partial coverage on the second group. However, if you switch that around and you group those 2 together, like that, then you suddenly get full coverage on both groups. So really, that is pretty important to look at how you're grouping. And of course, this is a very simplistic example, but as Paloma noted in her slide, even when you get to 5 schools, you suddenly start to get very high in the numbers, and pretty quickly becomes not even computable after 10 or 11 schools in the district. But as a kind of a tangible example, here's an example of Oceanside Unified down here in San Diego County. So one version of this is already an optimized grouping that's happening there. one version comes out at, and this might not be the exact federal reimbursement rates, but at this point this is all equivalent. One comes out at $2 million estimated reimbursement, and then by just running our optimization further along, we actually find a new grouping that's 13% higher. So that translates into $260,000 more in projected annual reimbursement for that year. So again, these numbers can shift a little bit, but 13% gain on that reimbursement is significant, and doing that using a tool like Meals Count is really essential because that can lead to real gains in how you're doing. And with the same exact schools that you're trying to get under CEP, you can just get a significant larger amount of reimbursement if you get the grouping right. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into talking about how to use Meals Count. So first thing, as Paloma mentioned, this is at its heart right now a web-based tool. So the first thing you want to do is navigate to mealscount.com. The link's there. Once you get to mealscount.com, as you see here, you're going to want to click on Find Your District in the top navigation. So that's going to load up Meals Count, the full state view of the whole U.S. So right now, this tool is actually applicable to the entire country, but we do have some people outside of California using it. But for California, we actually have data pre-filled, and so you want to click on obviously in California. So the next step is going to pull up a whole list of the districts in California. And so you can go ahead and start typing the name of your district in this filter districts box up here. So once this happens, so for instance, if you're typing Oceanside, it would filter down the list, and you can see your district right there, and you can click on that district. Now, just to note that if you don't see your district showing up, you can just clear out the box at the top there and use like the Control F or Command F on a Mac to look for it. And if you don't see it, you should definitely contact us. So we get this data from CalPADS, but it's just always possible that some schools come in a little differently. All right, so once you click into your district, you'll end up on the district detail page here. So it's going to show the name of your district, and it's going to have some summary information at the top here. So one thing to note is when we upload the site, every time we push it up with data, we run the data that we have, the example data that we have, we run that and we come up with an estimated reimbursement. This is an estimate, and this is not based on the latest, most current data. We start this out with, at this point, we have the 2019-2020 CalPADS CUPC data that was loaded, and we've used the direct certified column here to provide our estimates. But again, these are estimates, and it's important that everyone comes in here and puts in your latest data into the tool as a first step. So from there, you can scroll down on this district detail page, and you'll see the list of all the schools, and you'll see they've already been highlighted based on the initial recommended grouping, based on that placeholder data, just to give you an idea of what's going on there. You'll see all the schools and so on. So just quickly to talk about the different columns that we have here, I'll do a rundown of those. So the first one is going to be the recommended grouping. So on the initial run and any further subsequent optimization that you run, the recommended grouping is going to show you which schools should be grouped together. So that's going to be a numerical grouping. So just clicking back to this prior slide here, you can see that there would be a group number 1, which would be a 1 Oceanside High in this example, and it would be all by itself. The second group would be group number 2, and you can see there's 2 schools. There is color coded, but it can be a little faint. And those would be those 2 schools. And group number 3 here would have, it looks like 4 schools in it, and so on. The next one is going to be school code. So that's a reference value, but we do need to have a school code loaded in there just so that we can sort the schools when they come out. The next one is going to be a name of the school and then type of the school. Again, this is pre-filled from CalPADS data. These 3 values are for reference only. The school code is essential, but the other ones, none of them influence the calculations. The next number is going to be the total enrolled number. So this is the total number of students enrolled in the school. After that, we're going to have total eligible. So that's the estimated number of identified students on CalFresh and CalWorks. So that's the direct certified number in the numerator that Gurjeet was talking about for each school. Going on, we're going to have breakfast average daily participation. So this is the average daily number of breakfasts served. So it's important that this is a daily number because we do show the number multiplied by the 180 days in the school year. And then the other point is that this is a number you definitely need to pay attention to. We're not anticipating any growth. We don't add a percentage or any percentage increase in this. As Gurjeet mentioned and Paloma I think also mentioned, there is projected increases if the school goes from not CEP to CEP. potential increase in participation rate. So you might want to look and explore that as you are doing your calculations. It does influence the ultimate grouping, the actual participation rate. So again, breakfast and lunch, average daily participation. The next one is included in optimization. This is a checkbox, a yes/no checkbox. So there's a lot of data in the CalPADs where you may have schools within your district that aren't part of your school nutrition program. So for instance, charter schools and so on. So you can either remove them from your optimization or you can just uncheck them. And that just excludes them from the optimization. It doesn't get rid of anything. So it might be, you might want that for reference just so you know that it's in there, but you're not including your calculation. The other reason that this is in there is that we have seen sometimes some results with meals count come up where you don't have an ideal grouping, where sometimes two schools might be put together. Say you have a school from a high income group and a school from a low income group, and it turns out that the best way to get reimbursement is to put those together in CP and leave a middle income group out of the groupings and not eligible for CEP, just because that's what gets you the most reimbursement. But that might not be something that's actually feasible. So being able to kind of remove schools from the grouping as you're doing your calculations can be helpful as you're trying to figure out what works best for your district. The next column is the estimated school ISP. So again, this is just a real-time percentage calculated from the eligible and the total enrolled numbers that you have put in. And then we just have a school CEP eligible, just a quick note on whether or not that school meets the 40% threshold. And then the estimated annual reimbursement. So based upon the most recent time you ran the submit to optimize it, that will show you what estimated reimbursement is based upon the specified rates and the participation rate for that school. All right. So sorry, that was a lot of information, but hopefully it'll become a little more clear as I go through this next step. So going back to the interface again, so these are the columns I just talked about, and again, each row here below is corresponds to one of your schools. So when you go into it, you'll see again the placeholder data input from 2019-2020 school year CUPC CalPAD data file. You can click the edit button at the top left, and that's going to transform each row here into an editable row. So you have a bunch of key fields that you need to edit here. So the first field that you need to see, you have the total enrolled numbers, the total eligible, the average daily participation, average breakfast daily participation, average lunch daily participation, and again, that checkbox to remove or include that school from the calculation. Another thing to note is that when you hit the edit button at the top of the screen, you have to scroll back up to do it. We have the federal reimbursement rates. So these are rates that you'll have to tune based upon your district's federal reimbursement rates. And the note is that you can actually, I believe that that's something you can see on the CP estimator Excel file from the USDA, but that is something that you don't know. I know you can also reach out to one of the partners in this group to figure out what that is. So, so the next step is you might have, so once you've edited your total enrolled and eligible numbers and your average daily participation and lunch, breakfast and lunch participation, you might want to change the number of schools or the schools that are in your listing to match your school nutrition program. So, so you have two parts of it. You can either remove a school row, so there's a remove button here. Sorry, this circle's a little bit off. But what we're looking at right now is to click the remove button. That will remove a row from your listing. And then on the other side, you have the inclusion optimization. And if you uncheck that, that will just remove the school from the calculation. The next thing is you might also have schools. That are not listed in this listing. So as I understand it, there are a lot of areas where some preschools are covered by the nutrition programs. And so depending on eligibility, you might need to add a different site into this listing. So at the very bottom of the list, you can go ahead and you can enter in a new add school here. So you'll have to make sure you enter in a school code. If you don't have a specific school code, you can enter any sort of placeholder value that's unique. School name, there is a school type for reference. You can just leave that as public as it is. And then you can go ahead and enter in the total enrolled, total eligible, breakfast and lunch average daily participation. So once that is all complete, you're going to go up to the top of the list again and you hit submit. So when you hit submit, that submits to the servers, and that's going to go ahead and run a grouping calculation. So it'll say pause, please wait, and it's going to go ahead and start running that calculation. And it'll take a few seconds depending on the school and the district and how much time. And then once it updates, you'll see this update timestamp here in this gray field right here. It's going to show you that it updated, and you'll see a new grouping being shown. And at this point, all the information on the page will be updated to this new grouping that you have. So as you go through it, you can enter in all your information and you can hit submit, and it will go ahead and run the grouping optimization, and it'll give you a new updated recommended grouping. And again, you can scroll up and you can see what your estimated annual reimbursement. And we also do, so again, we have different strategies that we use under the hood, different algorithms. One of the parts of this tool is that we have different ways to do it. So for any school, any district, 11 schools or below, we actually run every single possible combination of schools, and we find out what the absolute maximum reimbursement is for that. So that's a fairly confident number that we put out. For anything above 11 schools, it's just too much for us to do with computers. It gets very big very quickly. So instead, we have an algorithm that runs through. That really does a best effort to find the maximum we can. So one important note here is that our STEM, since this is a web-based tool and you can access it in effectively real time, we are tuned towards speed. So as we get bigger and bigger number of schools for larger districts, it is possible to get higher optimizations beyond what the tool is going to do when you submit it right there. So if you are looking to really see if we can find an increase in a maximum, please contact us and we can run your grouping and try to see if we can find anything that's even more maximal. So this is kind of the current values that we have set at is, again, it's optimized for something that gives us a pretty darn good optimization where we beat out a lot of the other optimizations we expect. But we do know that if in some circumstances, larger districts, we can potentially get a higher number if we run that, for a longer time. So please contact us. Okay, so just kind of going back to the summary results here again. At the top, you'll be able to see, if you click by group, you'll be able to see a summary of all the groups, just talking about how many schools there are, what the group ISP is, and what the estimated reimbursement is for that school for this optimization. And you'll see also the rates there. So the important part at this point is to go ahead and save your work. So Meals Count doesn't save anything of any school information in the back end. We just have the initial information. So any step of the way, if you want to save what you've imported, the best thing is to go ahead and export that out again. So you can click the Export to CSV button right here on the site when you've kind of gotten to your first optimization. You can do this as many times as you want to export and just resave as a different CSV each time. So again, that's going to pop up a little overlay here where you click download and it will just download that CSV file. So probably most of you are very familiar, but a CSV file is a comma separated value file. It's a spreadsheet formula. It's just a single sheet, and it will load into Excel or any other similar spreadsheet program so that you can look at that data as a spreadsheet. And so just looking at what comes out when you do a CSV export. So you will get a simplified version of what we're showing there. With really the essential columns, and I know this is too hard to see here, but we have got the state, the district, the group numbers we're recommending. So again, this is numerically grouped, so you have to look at the 1s, the 2s, the 3s, and the 4s, and those are the groups that we're recommending. The school code that you enter in, school name, and again, enrolled, eligible, average daily breakfast, average daily lunch served, including optimization, which can be true or false depending on that. And then finally, the estimated reimbursement that we calculated as part of our process. And then finally, the other thing is going to be the reimbursement rate. So that's going to be on the first row only there. We'll have the federal reimbursement rates for the free rate, the paid rate, and the free lunch rate, and the prepaid rate, and so on. And so it's important to keep those rate rows, that rates there on the first row there, because every time if you share the CSV with somebody else on your team, that is when they go to import this again, if that is not the default rates, that's going to be important to make sure that reimbursement that you're seeing coming out again is matching what you looked at, so just everything is lined up. All right. So going back to it, so once you have that CSV file, it's come back. Obviously, you don't want to have to go through and enter all that data all over again. So that's why we do have a import CSV function. So when you click import CSV, missing that one slide there, but the import CSV file, you can click import CSV, and then at that point you can drag and drop the CSV file into the import CSV overlay, and it will say OK when it's completed. And at that point you can close that, and once you've imported, you will have to hit submit again. So it's important to click that submit because that's going to go ahead and trigger the recalculation. So just when you import CSV, it's not going to be regrouped yet until you press submit, even if you're doing it again. All right, so that was a lot of information, and I know I kind of went through it really quickly. I'm going to do a quick demo in a moment here, just to kind of tie it all together so you can see it in practice. I just want to kind of go over a couple really key notes here, and then also touch on following up with support. So the first thing is you must export to CSV to save your district. So if you've taken the time to put all your numbers in, please click export to CSV and download that CSV and put it somewhere. And also, if you contact us, if you want to have our help in trying to understand or tune your numbers, or if you're running into problems, it would be great to send us that CSV file also that you exported, just so we know what you're working with and we can take a look. To share your export, so you've done a recommended grouping and you've entered that information in, and maybe you're discussing what that participation rate bump might be with some of your colleagues, you'll want to send that CSV file back and forth so that can be imported again. And you can do as many CSV exports as you need. We're not saving anything on the server itself. And again, to import a saved district, you import CSV and click Edit and Submit to recalculate the groupings. All right, I think we're a little tight on time, but I'm going to quickly do this. I'm going to try to do this as fast as I can, and then I will turn it over to the next speaker. So I'm going to go ahead and do a quick screen share here. Let's see. And then here we go. So here is the meals count website. So going from here, again, we click on Find Your District. So you're going to see here is the U.S. and I'm going to click on the lovely state of California here, and it's going to load in all of the districts. So again, I'll click up here. I'm going to type Oceanside, and you see here's Oceanside, and you click on Oceanside Unified. So again, here we have the entire list. And one thing to note is that this is a big wide column here, so please make sure you scroll right and left. You're not seeing things going there. So the first thing is I'm going to hit Edit here. So you can see now it just changed to the editable box. I'm going to look here and say, okay, this charter academy, these two charter schools right here are not involved in my program. So one option would be I just uncheck including optimization for these two, and then I can just go ahead and maybe I would go through and edit some numbers here. I'm going to go ahead and say submit, and it's going to go ahead and say, please wait. It's going to be running the grouping calculation right now. Again, it does take a few seconds. So now you'll see that the groupings have changed, the colors have changed here. And our reimbursement has changed. And then at the bottom, you can see kind of grayed out that these are the two schools that did not include an optimization. So at this point, I might want to save. So I would click on Export to CSV. I'm just going to go ahead and click Download. And go with Download my CSV file there. So I'm going to show you right here. I'll move this in a different folder here. And just to show you again, I downloaded this before, but this is essentially what the spreadsheet would look like here in the CSV file. So going back here again, say I've gone back and I want to load that, so I could refresh this again here, and I'm back to this here, and then I want to reload this information. I click Import from CSV, and you can't see it off screen here, but I'm going to drag this file over here, and I just dropped it into this box here, and it showed up there. I'm going to hit Import. So this is Import Complete. So I'm going to close this window, and I'm going to hit Edit and Submit again. And so sorry, it's a little cumbersome there, but that's just an important step. So make sure it recalculates it. And finally, I just want to edit here again. I just want to show that you can edit these rates up top here. So please make sure that those rates are applicable to your school. All right, and then so the last part of this is I just want to quickly show some of the resources we have on the site, and we do look to expand this as time goes on. So there was an FAQ where we've tried to capture a lot of the knowledge that CFPA and FRAC and other organizations are putting into this. And I think CFPA and San Diego Homeland Coalition put this together. So this is going to try to answer some of those questions. If there's questions that you have beyond that, there's a contact form here. Please do submit questions. We try to be as responsive as possible. This is a project that we've been working on, but there certainly are some issues that might come up as we deal with it. So as soon as we see about that, please be patient and just send us your information. And finally, we are looking at right now, we just added a chat box here that may be conditionally staffed. So if someone's here, please, if there's no one available, please hit the contact form. But if we do have someone around to answer questions, we will try to help answer your questions as you go through it. All right, with that, I'm going to stop my share here, stop sharing here, and I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to the FRAC team. There we go.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for that great presentation. What wonderful resource. This is Etienne Melcher-Philbin, Senior Policy Analyst at the Food Research and Action Center, more commonly known as FRAC. Thank you. I'm thrilled to see so many schools in California interested in adopting community eligibility for the upcoming school year. I know that the amazing resources and tools my fellow presenters have shared can really help you build the support needed to adopt community eligibility. And want to share a few other FRAC calculators to throw into your toolbox. Next slide. So we have 3 financial calculators to help you crunch the numbers. I did see a few questions in there about what is the magic number to break even, and that definitely depends on the district and size, and if you're doing it district-wide in a group of schools and a few schools. So we tried to create a few worksheets to help you do that. So on fraccep.org, you will find our CEP break-even calculator, our district-level calculator, and our school-level calculator. Next slide. So I'll go over real quickly. Like I said, these are worksheets that you can download, and I'll share a little bit of info on the break-even calculator, but definitely encourage you to check out our website for more information to download, because I believe that the instructions are pretty straightforward, hopefully. And if not, please let us know. But for the break-even calculator, we'll provide you with an overview of the participation rates required to break even on an average daily basis. So you can use this for your entire district, single schools, or a group of schools. You will need your district's average daily attendance, the ISP, current per meal reimbursement rate, current per meal food and materials expenses, as well as your hourly labor rates. All information is included in the instructions, and the input cells that you can see are indicated by a blue font. And specific notes and guidance for inputs can be found in the pop-up sections of the cells. On the break-even calculator tab, as you can see right here on this page, you can adjust it to fit your needs. So like I said, with the analysis level, if you want to go, you can see that at one school, a group of schools, or district-wide. The example here on this slide is district-wide. And so please select what programs you plan on operating. We know a lot of school districts have made CEP work with after-school suppers, and that's something to think about, just really maximizing the reimbursements that you're getting. And so added that in there, as well as snacks. So looking at your entire program and looking at your expected participation rates. I know my fellow speakers talked about CEP. Usually you do see an increase with CEP, and then you see an even bigger increase when you put CEP with potentially breakfast after the bell. So rethinking, you're probably not going to have the same participation rates that you had in years prior. So really thinking about that, and also thinking about that with your outreach plans, as well as your labor expenses. And that'll help you generate the numbers to break even. And so it's not in this screenshot, but you will see your hopefully your net income, but what you can do to break even and hopefully generate that income. And then with the next tab, it breaks it down by participation rate. So here we have the expected participation rate of 80 for breakfast, 90 for lunch, but it'll break it down in steps of 10. So definitely take a look at that. We also have, like I said before, a CEP district level calculator. And this calculator is designed to assess the financial considerations of operating community eligibility at the district level. And you will need the district average daily attendance, ISP, current reimbursement rates, which we haven't gotten from USDA yet for the upcoming school year, but we'll definitely post as soon as they're available. Current meal food and materials expenses, and of course your labor. So you just follow the directions in the tab. It's pretty straightforward. You just need to have your district numbers in front of you. And the school level calculator, as you can guess from the title, allows you to do that at the school level. And the school level calculator also allows you to account for your non-CEP schools. So if you are doing partial implementation, looking at the whole financial picture before adopting. So you can download these worksheets on our website. I know I can see a lot of questions popping up in the Q&A box, so I definitely want to leave time to get to those. So won't walk through all of them, but because I do think the best way is to download these and look. But if you do have questions that pop up as you work through these spreadsheets, we're happy to provide TA on any of these tools. And like I said before, the reimbursement rates for the upcoming school year are not out yet, but once those are released, we will update the worksheets with those updated rates. So probably the same day. So just take a look out for that to help you crunch the numbers. So with that, like I said, these are all on fraccep.org. And now I want to turn it over to Angeles before Q&A. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Etienne. We are really excited about these financial tools and trying them out, and we really appreciate all that your team has to do to develop them. We also appreciate you co-hosting this webinar with us and your team for helping out setting everything up. If you have questions for Etienne, please write them in the Q&A box. Keep on writing your questions. If we don't get to everything today, we'll send a copy with all the answers that we can gather. We are going to ask the Q&A sessions shortly, but I just wanted to say a word of appreciation for Tia Shimada. She is the Director of Programs at CFPA, and she has been instrumental. Her leadership in this project is amazing. So thank you, Tia, and take it away.
Well, thank you, Angeles. That was very thoughtful and very kind. Hi, everybody. It's been a lively session over here in the Q&A box. I have tried to answer some questions. Thank you, Gurjeet, as well, for jumping in. I've been able to answer some of your questions privately, but we also want to make sure that we raise for the group some of the recurring questions and some of the big topics that you all have been covering in the Q&A. Thank you all for your comments and questions. I do want to point out, as Angeles just said, if we're not able to answer your question in real time today, or if you asked a question very specific to the situation in your particular district, we will follow up after the webinar to make sure that we get your question answered. So if you don't get an answer today in real time, please do know that an answer is coming. Gurjeet, I think I actually want to start with you. There were a number of questions that came in about CEP overall, and I was hoping that you could touch on a couple of topics. The first being, and I know this is a concern that often comes up for school districts who are considering the move to CEP, but the interaction between CEP and LCFF. And do districts need to be concerned that a move to CEP necessarily harms the bottom line when it comes to LCFF?
So I'll start by saying I'm not the LCFF expert at CDE, but a lot of districts have moved to establishing what we call an LCFF base year. Because yes, this is probably the most common concern I think that food service directors share that come from their CBOs or from their superintendents of, well, you know, that information that we get in those meal applications is really important. What are we going to do without all those meal apps? So the LCFF base year allows the district to basically collect an alternative income form once every 4 years, and then that data then is used for the LCFF calculation. In one of our previous webinars, we had Stephanie Bruce, who's a food service director, she was able to talk, about specifically her experience. That it's more so, I think, a challenge of educating the district leadership that, yes, going to CEP does create this one additional hurdle for LCFF, but the overall benefit of it still certainly outweighs that one challenge. And with the LCFF base year, what most districts that I know have done it is they align it with their CEP. So, your CEP period is 4 years. So, once every 4 years, you would collect those alternative meal applications. And it does require some outreach to families. You do really have to, because there's no longer the incentive of, well, I can get meals out of this, but just educating the community to say, well, your participation and willingness to submit these meal applications does have a direct impact on the funding that our district is able to get. So I believe in one of my slides, I did have the link to our CEP webpage, and there is a tab on there about LCFF funding that kind of directs you more towards the subject matter experts at CDE that can talk more specifically about it, but it does talk at a high level about if you were to go to CEP and you want to establish an LCFF-based year, what that process looks like.
And CFPA has done some work actually with partners like CDE and FRAC in the past to address that very concern about whether or not CEP necessarily impacts LCFF in a negative way. And we can be sure when we send the follow-up materials to this webinar that we also share links to the webinar we did on that very topic. And it shares the best practices about the collection of income verification forms and the messaging about how those income verification forms and LCFF really do affect your child's school and classroom environment. And we've heard from a number of districts who have made the switch to CEP that they haven't felt that negative impact to LCFF, that with the income verification forms, they're able to maintain those really critical state funding dollars. So thanks to the person who raised that question, and we will be sure to follow up with more resources.
And Kate, I do believe that the webinar that you referenced we do link it on our webpage too. So if folks are there,
Fantastic.
You'll see it under the LCFF tab.
Okay. And then Gurjeet, we had a question come in. I think there was just a request for you to repeat what you said about Medi-Cal Direct Cert and its use in CEP. And I think there was just a question about the source of that Medi-Cal data. Yeah,
so just to be really clear, when using Medi-Cal free determinations for direct certification, that data can only come from CalPADS. So you're not collecting any Medi-Cal free list from any county level liaisons. You're only using those Medi-Cal free students that are identified through CalPADS is the main point I was trying to get home.
And then there was a question in terms of whether each group needs, for each school group, do you need a separate CEP application?
I believe no. I have to admit I haven't looked at the application in some time, but I do believe that the S&P Form 55 allows you to identify, if you have multiple groups, you identify the group that each site is attached to.
Okay, thank you for that.
That's one I will need to follow up on to make sure I'm giving the right guidance.
Okay. And then last question for you, Gurjeet, at least for now, in terms of for school districts who are able to set up an agreement with local entities for getting direct certification data, there was a question about whether or not that local data can be used for direct certification in terms of foster status and homeless status. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, Gurjeet, we're keeping him on the line, so if you have more questions for Gurjeet, please do enter them into the Q&A. If we can't get him to answer them today, we will follow up and make sure you get your answer later. I am going to move to a couple of questions that I saw related specifically to Meals Count. So Meals Count team, get ready to jump in. There was a question about what do I do if I have preschools in my meal program, but they don't show up in the preloaded Meals Count list. Nikolai, you want to jump on that one?
Sure. Yep. So that's the situation. So definitely that's something that we've encountered. So that's again at the bottom of when you go to edit your school district, at the very bottom there's going to be an add school row, and that's where you want to enter in your preschools. So you can just add any sites that you want at the bottom. So you just enter. You have to create a school. If you don't have a school code specifically, just add the school name as a school code or something like that. We'll need something there, and then go ahead and add in the enrolled, the eligible, and the ADP numbers for that school or that preschool, and you go ahead and click Add School, and you can add all of those schools as individual rows. And then when you go to Export CSV, you can save that. So next time you can just go ahead and import that CSV with those preschools already added if you want to do further calculations.
And then there are a number of folks who raised the very good point that this year and next year are probably going to look worlds apart, and wanting to understand what should they, if they're updating their data in Meals Count, so taking the preloaded data and tailoring it, what should they be using for the average daily participation? Does it have to be from a certain time period? What should they be inputting there?
I think maybe Paloma, do you have some thoughts on that, on what you think there? Because I mean, basically I think that comes down to what your, so in terms of meal count, how it's doing its optimization is it's really saying, this is the amount of meals, so the reimbursement you're going to get is based upon the meals served. And so it's taking that into account when calculating how to maximize the reimbursement. So what you're really trying to figure out is how to project your participation in the future. And I think that maybe that's something that that someone more familiar with how to project that maybe could answer. I don't know, Paloma, if you have any thoughts in terms of that, whether or not to add 2% increase or whatever the projected increase is based upon converting a school to CEP and universally free school meals. So there's an increased participation or otherwise.
I'm sorry, I'm a little confused with the question.
So
Yeah.
I'll try to answer it, and you tell me if this is
Yes.
right. So folks are wondering, for the purposes of a meals count, we put in the average daily participation number, and folks are asking, what should that average daily participation come from? I think what we're encouraging folks to do is to try to pick an ADP that best reflects what you think is going to happen this year. And that's a really hard question for us to answer because we're not on the ground in your district. But for meals count to give you the most accurate findings possible, we're asking you to consider what you think average daily participation is going to look like for your program in the coming year, because we're trying to project ahead. So that, of course, is going to depend on what school opening looks like for your district, what meal service you're offering. Are you doing breakfast in the classroom? How does your meal program actually look on the day-to-day? But again, for the purposes of meal count, it doesn't have to be tied to any specific time period. The best thing you can do is use an ADP that reflects what you actually think is going to happen for your program in the coming year.
Yes, yeah, and just to add, I've been working with some school districts to run different scenarios, and we're using ADP that's more reflective of the year, and some schools are using ADP from last year, starting when the school year started up until March, so that it doesn't reflect like the change in participation after the school closures. And then we're running that scenario, and then we're running a second one with projected ADP. So if we think that some of the schools might get a 5% increase in participation because everybody's going to have access to free meals, then we add that 5% to the ADP on Meals Plus and submit again so that we can get the projected reimbursement, and schools can compare that way.
Gurjit, kind of related to this topic, can you go back to the CEP cycle, and are folks necessarily locked in to the entire 4-year cycle, or can they reestablish and start the 4-year cycle in the middle of that?
Yeah, so I mean, at any point in that 4-year cycle, if you want to reestablish, we've had a lot of districts over the last couple of years because they see, oh, hey, my ISP previously was 58%, and now I can get a 59% ISP or 60% ISP. So we've had a lot of districts that do reapply to increase that number, so they do have that flexibility. You are guaranteed that once you apply and you lock it in, if that ISP goes down, you do not have to shift it down. So it's kind of the best of both worlds in that sense. And then while I have the line, I do want to thanks to Chelsea Cooper on our team. She's on this webinar. She's the real CEP guru. So she's clarified related to the application piece. If you're applying, the S&P 19 form will take one form for all groups, but we will require separate S&P 55 forms for each individual group. So I guess my main point is to hammer home is to connect with your county specialist, because they'll make sure that you got all your ducks in a row when you get that application in.
Okay. And then Gurjeet, could you also take us through the question? There was a couple of questions about rounding and when you're looking at your ISP and how many numbers after the decimal point are actually included.
So the ISP is not rounded. And when I say not rounded, like if it's below 40%, you cannot reach that 40% by rounding. And I believe it's 2 decimal points that that it goes to. But I'm not sure off the top of my head. So we'll have to follow up with that one after the webinar.
Okay. Kelsey, if you can hear us, type it into the Q&A. Okay. And then there was, ATN, there was a question about someone, and I think you answered it in the chat box, but hopefully we can give you a chance to say it to the whole group again, in terms of where everyone can find those really helpful financial calculators. Where should they be navigating to get that information?
Yes, thank you. If you go to fraccep.org, so FRACCEP.org, you should be able to find those tools. So there's a tab right on the homepage after you you create an account, so everything will save for you. But you click on financial tools and then you'll be able to download as well. But I also included the address in the chat box, so please take a look and please let us know if you have questions. We have our contact information on the page, but hopefully it's straightforward, but always happy to help provide TA as you work through those different worksheets.
Okay. And there were a couple of questions, Gurjeet, or I'll open this to anybody who on the panel who may have experience working with districts who are trying to do the same, in terms of being able to get local data from your county agencies for the purposes of direct certification. I know in our experience, we've talked with a lot of districts who have gone through sometimes several hoops, sometimes just a few hoops in terms of trying to establish an MOU to get that data. And just wanted to know, Paloma or Gurjeet, whoever wants to answer here, in terms of any thoughts on best practices for school districts to be able to access that local data for direct certification.
I'll just kind of speak, and I don't cut me off if I'm not addressing the question, but I think an MOU is not necessarily required, but it is a best practice because it really, what it does is it formalizes that process between, your district and that local county agency. Oftentimes, I mean, we have heard challenges of, like, part of the challenge is often getting to the right person at the county to be able to provide that data. But what the MOU or the agreement really does is it makes sure that process goes beyond just those 2 individuals, and it becomes something that's institutionalized between those organizations. So that way, when somebody moves on, that process still continues to live. But I think, the MOU is not a requirement, but it is highly suggested to get that in place to make sure that it's ongoing. I don't know, Paloma, if you have anything else to add from your experience as a director.
I can speak from San Diego School Districts. The office that we can reach out to is the Office of Eligibility and Operations with San Diego County. The MOU, once it's done, it requires a signature usually from the CBO and the superintendent at the school district. So it depends on how quickly that process goes. Then in my experience, I was able to reach to the person in that office and get a report on a monthly basis.
Great, thank you. I'm going to bring us back to meals count for a question that I think is popping up in a couple of different iterations in the Q&A box. I'm going to try my best to answer, but please, meals count team, do jump in if you think you can refine the answer that I'm giving. But the question is about what to enter in that total eligible column. And I would like to clarify that for the purposes of preloading data into meals count, there's only so much that we're actually able to access that's in terms of publicly available data. So what we've been able to preload is just a subset of directly certified students. So it's the students directly certified through CalFresh or CalWORks. we know there is a lot of other ways that kids can become eligible for free meals that don't involve CalWORKs and CalFresh. So it could be about your foster migrant homeless status. So there are other ways that you can be routed into a free and reduced price meals without the use of an application. And so we really encourage you all, as you're using the Meals Count tool, to use your most recent and most complete direct certification data to fill out that data field in the tool. Relying on our data, you're limited by, in the same way that we're limited in terms of the recency of the data and the completeness of the data. There's just only so much that we can access, and you probably have a much better picture of what your direct certification looks like in your particular district for your particular school. So we do encourage you to update that field, and you should use your whole direct certification picture. We are only able to preload a limited view of that. Nikolai, Paloma, Angeles, anything you would add on to that? Okay.
Just something to add.
Yes, go ahead, Paloma.
Yeah, sorry. The data in the eligible column, just to make sure that it's unduplicated numbers of students. I've seen that sometimes when school districts merge all of their numbers, sometimes the number has some duplicated students. So just to, that's a best practice to ensure that's an unduplicated number.
Okay, great. Yes, so your unduplicated direct cert, which will very likely be a different number than we were able to retrieve in the publicly available data. Okay. So I am seeing the chat box slow down a little bit. If you have any other burning questions, now is the time to enter them.
Tia, I'm going to jump in. Thanks again to Chelsea, who's our guru on this. So she's clarified, yeah, the ISP, we do not round for that, but when you're calculating the reimbursement, it is rounded to 2 decimal places.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, so I am going to, I think we've got all of them. Again, if we haven't answered your question in real time, there has been a tremendous amount of traffic in the Q&A box, which we really appreciate. All your questions are very welcome, and we did our best to keep up. We will be going through an entire transcript of the Q&A box to answer any questions that we weren't able to tackle now. So I think with that, I'm going to turn things back over to Angeles to wrap us up for the day.
Thank you so much, Tia. Oh, that was really, really informative. Thank you. I am so excited seeing so many people working together to get this done on time and help our families. Before we close this webinar, we would like to thank all who participated today. We hope that we have answered some of your questions and that you have new tools to help you enroll in CEP. We know that you work tirelessly to nourish our kids and to meet the community needs. And we really appreciate everything that you do. Thank you so much. I would also like to thank and give a special thanks to our panel of experts, Gurjeet, Paloma Perez-Beltran, Nikolai, and Etienne Malcher. Thank you so much for all your work. Thank you for being here with me, and thank you for planning and participating in this webinar. Please know that the slides, the PowerPoint, will be distributed by email, and also the Q&A. We'll work on that and send it out to you. Please keep an eye for future webinars and also subscribe to CFPA Action Alerts. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day. Goodbye, everyone.